So this video goes through bar graphs and some of the different bar graphs that you will see and have to be able to make. So there's a couple different kinds of bar graphs. They all have some similar things in common. And these are probably a type of graph that you have seen the most often. So if we look at this example, it's a vertical bar graph. So the bars go vertically. So our scale would be on this vertical axis or the y-axis, and our categories are along the horizontal axis or the x-axis. Notice a few different things. They've got a title, and we have labels on each axis. So this axis represents the number of students. This one represents the amount of pressure they feel. And then each of our categories has a label as well. Also notice how nice and neat it is. It would use a ruler, or for you guys, you would use graph paper. So this is an example of a vertical bar graph. The next one below on your sheet is a horizontal bar graph. It's very, very similar, except this time the bars go horizontally. So now the y or vertical axis has the categories, and the horizontal or x-axis has the numbers. Again, we have a title, we have a label with a scale, and we have our countries. Technically speaking, this one's probably missing something. It should have a label for that axis, which would be country. And everything else, again, is nice and neat, uses a ruler, it's professional looking. So that's an example of a horizontal bar graph. Something that might be new to you is a comparative bar graph. So let's look at the one on top versus the one on the bottom. The one on the bottom is just a standard bar graph. The one on top is a comparative bar graph. So what I want you to look at is, what do we notice that's similar and what do we notice that's different? So the first thing that you probably notice is that they both have titles and labels, and they both have numbers as a scale. They also both have vertical bars, and so that's something that they both have in common. What's different about them is that the one on the top has 2 bars, whereas the one on the bottom just has 1. And so why would we use a comparative bar graph? Well, if we're comparing things like what boys think versus what girls think, or what grade 8s think versus what grade 7s think, or anything like that, it can be comparison about your income levels. So what people that make more than $50,000 a year think versus what people that make under $50,000 a year think. Anytime that you're comparing something, you could create a comparative bar graph. One thing that is very, very important, and that has to do with this: the sample sizes must be the same. For example, if one class has 20 girls and another class has 20, and the same class has 20 boys, we can compare them. We can make some statements about who thinks what and why someone thinks more. But if we had a class that had 10 girls and 20 boys, if we looked at them, we can't just compare them as is, because naturally in this class, boys are going to say things more frequently than girls because there's more boys. So in this class, for example, if 5 girls said their favorite color was blue and 2 boys said their favorite color was blue, we could say that more girls like blue than boys. Here, if we said that, 8 girls' favorite color was green, but 12 boys' favorite color was green, we can't say that more boys like green, because 8 out of 10 is a very different number than 12 out of 20. So what we have to do in this case is use percentages. So when the numbers are not the same, we have to convert to percent. When the numbers are the same, we can just compare the numbers as is, or we can choose to convert to percent. So that's something really important when you're making a comparative bar graph. You can only use the numbers if the numbers of what you're comparing are equal. If the numbers of what you're comparing are not equal, you must convert to percentages. So let's look at an example. So let's say in a class we had, pink, blue, green, red, and yellow. And we wanted to do a survey of who liked which color the best. And let's say we did our little tally chart, and here's what we found. So here are our results. And what we want to do is we'll turn these tick marks into numbers. So girls, 5, 2, 1, 3, we have 4, we have 2, we have 5, 3, and 2. So the first thing that we want to do is check how many girls did we ask and how many boys did we ask. So we've got 8, 9, 10, 11, we've got 14 girls, and we've got 6, 11, 14, we've got 16 boys. So what we cannot do is we cannot just use straight numbers. We have to convert them into percents. So for example, 3 out of 14 would be approximately 21%. How did I do that? I did 3 divided by 14 times 100. 5 out of 14 would be approximately 36%. Now, I'm rounding here, so just be aware that I'm rounding to the nearest percent. That one would be 14%. 1 divided by 14 would be 7%. 3 divided by 14 would be 21%. Oh, I'd already done that one. Darn. When I add these up, I should get something really close to 100 or 100 exactly. And I get 99. And the reason I get 99 was a couple of these I rounded down because that's what the rounding rule said, but I had too many that I rounded down. It's okay that you got 99. You're really, really close. It's essentially 100. It's just the rounding because I decided to round to the nearest percent instead of rounding to the nearest tenth of a percent. I'm going to do the same for boys. I'm going to convert these into percent. So 4, this time I'm going to do 4 divided by 16 times 100. And the next one, 2 divided by 16 times 100. So this is 12 and a half. I'll make it 13. And that one I'll round to 31. And this one I'll round to 19. And this one will be 13 again. So again, when I add them, I'm hoping to get 100. And I get 101 in this case because these two were 12.5 and I rounded them both up. But again, you're close enough, that's okay. So now when you make your graph, first thing we need to do, so it was preset for number of students, we actually need to change it in this case to percent of. If they were both 14, I wouldn't have to turn them into percent. So now I can make my scale. There can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Oh, okay, so I've just made a mistake with my scale that we should actually talk about. So I was going up to 100 because in my head I was thinking that percent as out of 100. But what I actually should have done was I should have looked at my numbers and noticed that the highest percent I need to go up to is 36. So my scale, I don't actually need to go up to 100 then. I could probably go 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. There's 10, 20, 30, 40. Again, you'd use graph paper, so these would all be like half, like 15 or 5, 15, 25, etc. Along the bottom, that's where I'm going to put my colors, like pink and blue and green and red and yellow. So what I then do is I need to make 2 bars. Now I'm not going to use a ruler, but you should. If it's something that you're going to be doing and handing in, you should be. So girls, I'm going to use the color purple for girls, and so I'm going to have 21%. So that's going to be about there. And you would have a ruler and you would have graph paper. And then boys, I'm going to use the color red to represent boys, and they're 25%, so that's right there. Then blue, I've got 36% girls, so that will be about there. And I've got 13% boys, that'll be about there. Again, you would have graph paper and you'd be doing it a little bit more accurately. Green, we've got 14% girls, so that's about there. And boys, we've got 31%, and so that would be about there. And then red, we've got 7% girls, which would be about there. And 19% boys, which will be about there. And then yellow is 21% of girls and 13% of boys. Whoops, I need to make that red. 13% of boys. And then the only other thing I need to do, I already have my titles, so you'll notice called percent of students, called favorite colors. I've got my title, I have my labels and my labels, but I need to explain what the purple box is and what the red box is. So I need to add a legend. So anytime you do a comparative bar graph, you need to add a legend that tells you that the purple one is what the girls thought and the red one is what the boys thought. Now you can ask questions, or you can answer questions like, what is the girl's favorite color? And you can clearly see that blue is the girl's favorite color and green is the boy's favorite color. You can also, ask things like, who likes pink more, boys or girls? And so based on that, you can compare. And again, it's all based on a percentage. You don't want to make a comparison just based on the raw numbers if they are not equal. If both of these were 15, then we could make a comparison and we wouldn't have to turn it into percent. But that's what a comparative bar graph looks like. It's exactly like a bar graph, but it has two bars that are comparing two different things. It has this addition of a legend, and notice that the two bars that are being compared are side by side. There's no space, so it's two bars, then a space, two bars, then a space, and so on.